My name is Josiah Lulham. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne in anthropology. And for the last 6 years, I've been studying live-action role-playing communities in the city of Melbourne and looking particularly at how live-action role-players aim to be immersed. Based on my experience as an ethnographer doing Larp in Melbourne in this presentation, I'm going to propose we consider immersion as an experience prepared for, produced, and reflected on in practice. And I do this in contrast with some literature that I'm going to reference in a moment. This is one of the primary outcomes of my field work. As I begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm presenting this and I've completed my research on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay respects to their elders past and present and acknowledge as well that the sovereignty of the land on which I'm presenting and have done this research was never ceded. I make this acknowledgement because it's customary in Australia to do so, but also because it is important in the context of my research. In thinking about immersion and playing and researching with LARPers, we become people that make worlds in our role play. And an acknowledgement of country is a world-building statement in a way. It renders, or it makes present things that the ongoing structures and practices of colonisation render absent. Hence why I do it here with you today. So, reframing immersion, role-playing communities, and immersion as practice. To start with, I want to talk through a little bit of some of the literature that I drew on as I was thinking through immersion in my thesis. I draw on broadly three disciplines: game studies, performance studies, and anthropology. And across these disciplines, I see broadly three framings for immersion, to which I want to add this idea of, or this broader frame of practice. Also, just note, my notes are here, so that's why I'm looking away. The first is, I see immersion often understood as an experience. Immersion is something that takes over our attention, absorbs our attention, is a fundamental state of human consciousness experienced by an individual in these acute moments. The second theme I would see emerge was this idea that immersion was a kind of process. In theatre and performance studies, thinkers like Doris Kolesh see immersion as a process of oscillating back and forth between being within and being without that in which one is trying to be immersed. Brendan Keogh, in his reflections on the body in video gaming, talks about immersion as a process in which one actively constructs the illusion of their diegesis within a digital game world. And in analog role-playing game studies, Pojola talks about immersion in live-action role-play as a process of pretending to believe that one is the character they are playing. Finally, we see immersion discussed or framed by discourse. And this is the third kind of way I saw immersion being discussed or defined, constructed in the literature. Within the realm of role-playing games, White et al. Look at immersion as particular discourse that orients players towards particular ideals. But also as an anthropologist, I see immersion being engaged with often when anthropologists can consider the methods by which they do ethnography, participant observation. This has been written about by Vera Darmit as well as Axiel Kassanov. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. This idea that immersion is a construction. We contrive a self, we observe, perceive, or construct an other. And in anthropology, traditionally, we would construct, perhaps without thinking or unthinkingly, boundaries around into which we immersed, rather than, as Amit is quoted here saying, getting us to recognise that all of that is a construction. Immersion is in some way discursively contrived. Now, a bit about my research. I have undergone about 6 years of ethnographic work in a community based around a game called Swordcraft. Primarily, I would participate in Swordcraft. I did this fieldwork between 2019 and 2022, and then as I've been writing my dissertation, I still go in and out of games to continue to reflect on the analysis I've been doing. But primarily, I participated in this game called Swordcraft, which is an organisation that runs battle games every Friday night in Melbourne for up to 400 players, and then twice a year hosts longer camping events, either over a weekend or 7 days. After each event, I would take rigorous and descriptive field notes, and sometimes I took these at medieval fantasy events as well, dressing up as an anthropologist kind of character in this medieval fantasy and being a scrivener chronicling notes, which we saw in the photos earlier. And it was through Swordcraft that I became ingratiated and embedded in not just practices of immersion, but a community that practices immersion. It was with this community that I learned how to be a role player, a LARPer. I learned how to play, and also I learned how to be a community member. In addition to doing this participant observation, a key thread through my research or my research methods was autoethnography. I reflect on my own engagement with this practice, and I put that as I develop my own way of being a LARPer or develop my own ways of doing immersion in conversation with those I did my research with. And I put my own practice, what I developed in this community, in conversation with the theorising and the ideas of the role players I spent time with at Swordcraft. I want to note that as part of this research, I took on multiple roles. I was a researcher, I was a LARPer, but at times I was also a volunteer helping games. I was a non-player character, I was a game master. I tried on all these different roles, and all of them had these different orientations towards how to serve the immersion that LARPers wanted to create in these games. This had me see LARPers not as folks whose attention was absorbed in particular moments, or as individuals undergoing a singular individual process of immersion. That was definitely present, but rather I got to see immersion as the result of conditions which LARPers produced. That is, LARPers produced the conditions of their own immersion. Now, I saw this in 3 broad ways. In acts of preparation, making costumes, making characters, bricolaging stories together. I saw this as the roleplay started, as we enacted the settings, as we tried to make sure that we maintained our diegesis in the world, as we resolved moments of ambiguity by stepping out of play and calibrating, or staying in play but recasting the material of the world that maybe doesn't look medieval fantasy as part of the medieval fantasy, so as to maintain our inhabiting the world. And finally, after all of that, I saw a practice of sense-making or reflection. How LARPers would immerse themselves in future games was always informed by their past experiences, and many LARPers held on to formative experiences as lessons that they could return to themselves or share with other practitioners in conversation. Particularly important for moments of challenging ambiguity was reflection. Challenging ambiguity, like I've been in a moment, I'm experiencing character bleed, and I don't know how to make sense of this. Reflecting afterwards was a way of making sense of and understanding the immersion one was experiencing. What does framing immersion as a practice enable? Firstly, for me, I came to see immersion not just as an individual experience, but as a collaboratively produced community experience. And it was often understood multiply in Melbourne by LARPers. It could refer to the material that we assembled that made the world tangible. It could refer to the feelings that people were feeling while they were playing, the way they felt real or felt like they were inhabiting a place. And in this way, immersion seemed to be textural. It was tangible, it was sensuous, it was affective. This was the language of feeling was often how LARPers couched their practice. I want to also note that immersion was an ongoing practice, and those three elements that I outlined were always happening simultaneously. One was reflecting on a game that they played in order to prepare for the next game that they were going to be playing. One would prepare one way, informed by a way they'd prepared in the past, or even during a particular game, one might choose to play a certain way because they had memories or had an ongoing practice from the past. Finally, contextualizing immersion as a practice and researching it from multiple perspectives in a community, so as a player, designer, researcher, it enabled me to understand immersion thickly, that's Clifford Geertz's term, thick description, thickly and through time. It was something I learned in a community that I was able to refine my own practice and that I saw others refining. It was something that I felt we and the Larpers I played with were trying to get better at all the time, that we could experiment with. And in this framing, experience is not something that we wait to have happen to us, an immersive experience that absorbs our attention or takes us over, but it was something that we sought out to collaboratively produce through the practice of preparation, enacting, and reflections. That is, we were engaged in a practice of producing the conditions of our own immersion. That's all I have time for, but thank you so much for watching, and I'm really excited to hear your questions or your comments. Thanks so much and have a great day.